For anyone that doesn't know me yet, most of you, I think, will know me, or at least have seen me if you've watched these webinars or you've joined one of our energy modeling platforms. But I am Ken Alexander, the current CLEWs model curator, and also the energy modeling community lead. So yeah, if this is your first webinar that you've watched from us, you'll be seeing a lot more of me if you join in the future. And if you do come to any future EMPs, then you will probably see me there too. And nice to see some familiar faces that I've noticed in the chat. So, as you all know, as you've signed up today, we've got two great presentations about applying CLEWs within research. So, I'm really excited to hear everything about it. So, I'll hand over to Kumbuso first.
Thank you very much, Ken. Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. So my name is Kumbuso Joshua Nyoni. I'm Zambian. I'm an engineer, I think by practicing engineer, electrical engineer, renewable energy engineer. I've also been a student of under the Energy Modeling Platform for Africa and the summer school as well. So I should say my motivation to actually use modeling tools like CLEWs came from, should I say, the knowledge I gained through such initiatives. Yeah, so this is me in a way trying to almost like share what such platforms can do in terms of actually being transformative through real life applications linked to policy. So yeah, I think that's me. Just confirm, am I still audible?
Yes, we can hear you. Great.
Great. So I think I'll run you through this application of CLEWs. It's pretty much enhancing policy coherence for sustainable development in Zambia, an integrated assessment model-based approach to the Climate-Water-Energy-Food-Nexus. Okay, this is my presentation outline. Start with the background and problem statement, objectives and aims, research questions, appreciate the methodology, scenario design, then we'll look at it, briefly look at the results and the analysis and some key policy insights. Thereafter, we'll also look at the study limitations and any opportunities for further work. Then we'll conclude. So the significance of the water energy food nexus, I think it's especially in the Zambian context, this nexus is actually critical for the attainment of the Sustainable Development Goals. And I must say, Zambia relies on hydroelectric power, and it also relies on agriculture for livelihood. So these systems are somewhat interconnected, which makes studying such a nexus key. Then, of course, such a nexus connects the energy, food, and water systems. Let's have a glimpse of the policy landscape in Zambia. This is non-exhaustive, but it just provides a flavor. We've got the Vision 2030, which is pretty much was published some way back. Its aim is to ensure that Zambia is a prosperous middle-income nation by 2030, as presented here. Then we've got the 8th National Development Plan, which was published in 2022 and cuts across up to 2026. This pretty much, with regards to green growth, looks at environmental sustainability and also good environmental governance, just to name but a few. Then we've got the recently published Green Growth Strategy, this was published in the first quarter of this year, and it pretty much aims at achieving enhanced natural capital, enhanced green growth environment, enhanced resource efficiency, resilient and climate-compatible economic growth. We also have the nationally determined contributions, I think first published in 2016 and revised in 2021. This is pretty much looking at ways at which we can combine mitigation and adaptation efforts in the fight against climate change. So what are some of the key issues that are being faced in Zambia? I think at present, I would say the droughts, Zambia has been hit by the droughts due to the El Nino effect. So currently, I would say, or should I say, most of this year, on average, in terms of load shedding, in terms of number of hours, on average, 15 hours of load shedding have been faced daily. So imagine how that impacts everything in terms of livelihood. To make matters worse, the drought also negatively affected the yields from crops. So that is also impacting the livelihoods. That's got almost like a tripling effect in a sense. Then you find that there's biomass reliance has also increased exponentially. But just to give a context in terms of electricity production, hydro pretty much has been catering for about 85% of power generation. So imagine if there's no output owing to reduced water inflows, it pretty much impacts us quite a lot. So this pretty much is a key motivation of why such an assessment is necessary, because it looks at real life problems that are being faced in Zambia at present. Some of the aims and objectives, it's all about trying to appreciate synergies and understand conflicts that occur across the multiple resource use. So the aim is pretty much leverage CLEWs modeling to enhance policy coherence and integration in Zambia, and also to address trade-offs and synergies within the energy, climate, food, water nexus. Then we've got some objectives are pretty much to assess trade-offs within the nexus, quantify policy impacts on water, energy, and agriculture, then try by all means to see if we can identify institutional barriers to policy coherence. Thereafter, whilst being inclusive, develop actionable policy recommendations. Okay, so the research questions are pretty much snappy. We're pretty much trying to check how climate change impacts Zambia's hydroelectric capacity and the costs that are the cost implication for that, and also appreciate some of the climate change scenarios on crops, land use, and water, and then also try to assess the biofuel feasibility and the attainment of sustainable development goals. Okay, so this is the methodology to be able to achieve the objectives that we just discussed. So here, we've got where everything is starting from. We're reviewing studies, policies, and strategic plans in Zambia, whilst ensuring that this is stakeholder influenced planning and policy preferences, because we have to gauge the appetite for decision makers, the appetite for key players in the space. With that says, then identify, map stakeholders for engagement as part of cross-cutting across the review itself and the data collection. Then we start forming the CLEWs narrative in the Zambian context, then assess the publicly available data plus stakeholder data. Then based on that, look at the assumptions for the modeling. With that said, propose scenario design. The scenario design pretty much feeds into the scenario data. Then the assumptions as well feed into the CLEWs model data inputs. Then under data preparation, we ensure that now the output of this data preparation, we need to make sure that the data that we have in terms of the narrative, we haven't lost it here. We make sure that there's still that local context, even as we now try to align everything with the actual model. Then we've got the model validation, optimization, results. Then what is key here is the results itself. There's this feedback loop such that the results is just more or less like a starting point. Now you need to go back to your stakeholders to see if the result resonates to what's obtaining on the ground, or if there's further insights that can be obtained before further scenario analysis can be achieved. Okay, so some of the data collection in terms of sources, we're looking about local data, global databases as well. Then methods of collection involved policy reviews, interviews, stakeholder inputs. Validation as well was crucial in this process. comparison of model outputs with real-world data was done. Okay, tool selection. I think two tools I would say were used. LEAP was used for modeling demand beyond electricity. In as much as we try to ride under the principle of open data, open source, open access, LEAP, the software itself, is not open source, but the underlying data is what has been made open access in this regard. So osmosis, of course, aligns with the euphoria principles. So these were more or less like soft linked or worked in a complementary fashion. I think later on we'll be able to see how the energy demand was modeled in LEAP and how that was fed into osmosis for the CLEWs modeling aspect. Okay, this just shows a flavor of the energy demand modeling by sector. These are some of the sectors that were looked at. Residential in terms of transport, commercial industry, mining and quarrying, agriculture, other sectors, then exports. Then with that said, we're also looking at the same demand, but by fuel, which pretty much helps understand exactly the mix in the Zambian context in terms of the study horizon. The study horizon of interest was pretty much starting from 2019. It was cut at 2050, but of course with an option to extend this up to 2063, which aligns with Agenda 2063 for Africa. Okay, these are some of the CLEWs model inputs and outputs. Okay. We're looking at combination or under the inputs of technology data, temporal data, demand from the LEAP model as an output, techno-economic data, emission factors. Then we've got outputs stemming from resource CLEWs mix and system capacity, all the way up to scenario analysis and comparisons. With that said, we're also ensuring that we infer limitations and model uncertainties, such that even as we're trying to present insights, we know exactly what the limitations are and what the room for improvement is going forward. Okay, when it comes to modeling land and crops, I think it was imperative, first of all, to appreciate how land is distributed in Zambia. I think the cross-section area, the total land footprint in Zambia is close to about 744,000 square kilometers. So with that said, we've got a share which is made up of, should I say, cropland. So the million-dollar question is, okay, how much crops do you capture in your model for you to ensure that there's crop diversity and increased, should I say, harvest area in a sense? So this was done by ensuring that the crops that are chosen are relevant crops and the mix in terms of diversity owing to what income bracket or what value they actually offer to the Zambians, and ensuring that once everything is said and done, about 80% of that is captured in the model, such that the remaining crops will be less than 20%, which gives a good indication in terms of the impacts. Once you appreciate what each crop does or how it's impacted due to climate change effects in different parts of the country, then that's a true representation. So these are the crops that were actually looked into, which are pretty much relevant in the Zambian context. Okay, this just gives, should I say, the modeling of energy in terms of total energy supply. I already presented how the energy demand was structured and modeled in LEAP. This just gives a flavor of modeling water in this regard. We're trying to understand, even before you engage stakeholders, want to see just the high-level assessment of how population growth relates to total renewable water resources per capita. So of interest is this tipping point where you feel as if the water per capita tries to go negative, it's like depleted more than you can replenish. So this now forms a cornerstone of discussions of assessing whether the initial assumptions pertaining to the data that is readily accessible aligns with the trends going forward, or the plans and aspirations, or the historic records in the Zambian context. This is the CLEWs reference diagram. So this was pretty much a comprehensive diagram, which looks at all the crops, about 18 crop technologies, combination of irrigated and rain-fed. Of course, even the other land components captured, and also water technologies, diesel for agriculture, biofuel technology options as well, and also ensuring that the water balance is realized. Water precipitation plus water for agriculture has to give you the water from evapotranspiration, water for groundwater recharge, and also surface water. Then what you're seeing here is the power sector future technology options. Currently, we don't have wind, we don't have geothermal, we don't have floating PV, neither do we have nuclear, but these are part of the future mix. What we have is what is shown here in terms of coal, biomass, and these other low fuel and heavy fuels, and also a mix of hydro and also some solar, both utility and some rooftops. I think one key aspect that we also ensure that we do justice is trying to be inclusive in what we're trying to do. Because I think once stakeholders are engaged, it ensures that your findings are inclusive, and also the policy recommendation become inclusive, and it enhances the implementation thereof. So these are some of the stakeholders that were involved, and the process in this regard to find that here we've got the CLEWs mathematical model formulation, which is a combination of climate, land, energy, and water, while it's understanding the data gaps that are eminent. This is pretty much a quantitative representation, but then again, we're trying to translate the qualitative aspects to see how that can relate to the model itself. So we've got a policy needs assessment through stakeholder consultations, where you've got CLEWs aligned Zambian sectors. That is those sectors that are directly linked to the CLEWs system. Then we also have here the non-CLEWs aligned systems or sectors rather. We want to appreciate exactly how, for instance, gender is impacted by the CLEWs modeling framework. So this ensures that it's a participatory storylines that you want to be able to translate into what the model can actually help you in terms of insights which are data-driven. Then again, the dynamics in terms of stakeholder engagement is that you've got different actors, others are decision makers, others have got too much sway and influence. Then you'd want to ensure that you balance that such that the people with much power and influence do not, should I say, mask the, the submission or the value that these other stakeholders in the space bring, be it experts, be it academia, or be it different diverse group of stakeholders. So this combination now helps to ensure that the modeling that is being done has got a human face to it, as opposed to just modeling in isolation. Scenario design. So I think we're at the BAU, which is pretty much looking at the continuation of current policies and trends. This is what I was calling the baseline scenario. Then at mitigation scenarios, one of them is the biofuel adoption. The other one is the increased agriculture demand. This increased agriculture demand aligns with the integrated resource plan, which was recently published this year in terms of the ambition to actually enhance yields from agriculture. Then we've got adaptation scenarios. We've got the no adaptation, which is the NA, and the climate adjusted infrastructure scenarios. Then we've got other climate change scenarios that are looking at sustainability and high emission impacts. So it's imperative that initially what was done was the BAU was modeled and results presented to stakeholders just for them to provide a flavor of what they think in terms of, okay, does this align with what you'd expect in terms of both for the purpose of validating and also for the purpose of relevance. This looks at detailed table, which it's not exhaustive in that some scenarios are not included, but it's also got a description of what we're trying to discuss. We've got the business as usual. This is pretty much like I alluded to previously. It represents a future where current trends persist without significant policy or behavioral changes, providing a basis for assessing mitigation and adaptation strategies. Then I think I'll skip this. This is too much text. I'll go straight to the climate adjusted infrastructure. This involves modifying infrastructure investment to better understand climate impacts, such as enhancing the resilience of the hydropower generation through new water reservoirs and integrating drought resistance technologies like floating solar PV, wind, nuclear, and geothermal. I think it's also imperative to note that while at least the southern circuit in Zambia is impacted by droughts, the northern circuit is actually rich in water body. So this scenario looks at exploring, not necessarily neglecting hydro, but ensuring that future investments in hydro leverage the rich water body in the northern circuit, which is the northern part of Zambia. And of course, we've got the no adaptation scenario that looks at where we've got further climate change. Hydropower generation is there, but we're not pretty much we don't have infrastructure to adapt to that. So you find that the capacity factors reduce, and in so doing, you find that other resources that are readily available, like biomass, tend to be utilized more, which is actually what's happening currently in Zambia. Then you've got the increased agriculture demand that is just looking at increased, should I say, ambitious targets from the IRP. And this also is the biofuel adoption potential, looking at the prospects from the Renewable Energy Strategy and Action Plan, which was published in 2022 by the Ministry of Energy. And it had these targets, which are also modeled with an assumed growth rate of 3.5% beyond 2030. Okay, so yeah.
I just wanted to say if you could wrap up in a few minutes, if that would be okay.
All right, that's fine. Then
yeah, I don't want you to rush. Don't want you to rush the results, but yeah, just that we're a little bit pressed for time.
All right, that's fine then.
Thank you.
Then we've got the BAU results, which are pretty much looking at power generation here, annual domestic energy production. So here, as can be seen, it's predominantly hydro, which is currently hydro making up 85% of the mix, and the future continues in such a fashion. Then here we've got domestic energy production. Since this is energy, you find that biomass is predominantly factored in here. Then we've got the emission distribution for the BAU. Then this just shows the validation metrics that were followed for us to ensure that we validate, because before we can actually trust the model, the model results were validated for the years in question where we had data. Okay, this was a validation that was done, and deviation was pretty much acceptable, which shows that the model could actually be trusted as being robust for us to, should I say, propose policy insights. Okay, this shows the annual power generation that is from the climate adaptation outlook, where you've got 2026, 2030, 2040, and 2050. We've got the BAU, no adaptation, and climate adjusted infrastructure. Mind you, these are the three that have been benchmarked for the purpose of adaptation scenarios. What you're seeing here is pretty much the demand for that respective year, and what is generated in terms of, should I say, the actual power generated from the respective technologies. Then I think what I'll echo more on is on the actual capacity from this mix. So as can be seen, you find that the climate adjusted infrastructure tries to balance a mix of hydro, solar, wind, and I think the thing is not showing. The legend is not showing. I think it's clipped up. That's what it's trying to show. Then you've got the business as usual, which is pretty much showing hydro. You see. Then here you've got the no adaptation in green, we've got biomass, hydro. So this is showing that whilst hydro is there, it's constrained because of reduced water capacity. And also because of reduced capacity factor and reduced inflows. So for us to be able to offset that, biomass increases in the mix. So the same is possible. The same is true for 2050 as well. So what does this tell us? It shows us it's possible for us to have, should I say, a mix in future, but it won't be cheap, as can be seen by this. You find that by 2050, the climate-adjusted infrastructure in terms of dollars per megawatt hour is actually on the higher side. So it's telling us something that it's possible for us to have a resilient future, but we need to start preparing now to ensure that investments are being made in a phased approach for us to realize such a future. This just shows the biofuel feasibility, while we've got reduction of emissions from the biofuel adoption, and also the increased agriculture as compared to the business as usual. So you find that then we also have here the imports are offset due to biofuel coming in the mix. Then you also have crop area and crop production, which aligns with regards to, with the crops that are providing biofuel options for Zambia. Then I think what is key to note here is that by 2050, it's actually possible to offset imports by 42%. You see, so I think for us to be able to realize this future, we need to make sure that we appreciate the complementary aspects in terms of coherency. This should lead to sustainable agriculture practices, so that in as much as we're providing crops for energy, we're not competing with food security. So that's something that is imperative and worth noting. So this just pretty much is a way of trying to answer research questions through analysis and stakeholder engagement. I think from the first research question, which was pretty much about ensuring achieving a resilient hydropower system and appreciating its costs. So I think it's imperative to note that the no adaptation scenarios heavily runs on hydropower makes Zambia vulnerable to climate variability, as could have been seen in the results. In contrast, the climate-adjusted scenario showed a diversified energy mix with solar PV, floating solar coming into the mix. This underscores the need for diversified investments to mitigate risks and achieve long-term sustainability. It's imperative that we're not talking about this option being cheaper, but we're talking about it ensuring that it enhances security of supply. And for us to start planning now, it ensures that we have a phased approach for us to ensure that we've got something that is affordable going forward. Then the third research question is we've got the increased agriculture demand scenario and the biofuel adoption scenarios that they demonstrated significant potential for biofuel production, particularly if you're looking at soybeans and maize, reducing reliance on imported fossil fuels. However, it's key to note that careful management is needed to balance fuel needs and food security, which emphasizes the need for enhanced practices and efficient land management use for agriculture purposes. Then I think what was key from the stakeholder engagement or insights were that insights stressed integrating solar power, promoting clean cooking solutions, and investing in, should I say, sustainable hydrogen technologies. Emphasis was also made on gender equality, sustainable consumption practices, and also leveraging climate finance or public-private partnerships for us to be able to ensure that we prepare and afford having such a sustainable and resilient future. Okay, some of the key policy recommendations were pretty much diversify the energy mix, strengthen partnerships and collaboration, implement gender-sensitive energy policies, adopt biofuels, but do it in a sustainable manner such that we are ensuring that the policies are acting in a manner that is coherent. Study limitations, we find that data gaps were there and some inconsistencies. So it took a bit of work to ensure that we harmonize data, and of course, limited stakeholder participation. Quite a number, I think over 50 stakeholders were initially engaged, but I think about close to 35 responded in a sense. Then also, we do understand that the CLEWs is a way of simplifying a complex system. So it's key to ensure that we enhance the granularity going forward. So the further work in this regard includes expanding local data collection and also broaden stakeholder engagement and refining sub-sectoral analysis. Because I think using the global agroecologic zones, I think I managed to extract using the GitHub code relevant insights at provincial level, but there was no time to, find data that is telling for other closed resources. So I think there's potential for one to actually look at provincial influence, which can be feeding into local councils in terms of the actual plans to appreciate the synergies and the conflicts that may arise at district level when it comes to resource optimization. In conclusions, I think it's clear to note that the CLEWs modeling offers a valuable framework for understanding and addressing Zambia's water, energy, food nexus challenges. By fostering policy coherence, Zambia can achieve energy security, water sustainability, and food resilience while aligning with global climate goals. And also, it's imperative to note that investments in renewable energy and resilient infrastructure will be critical for the country's sustainable development. Okay, if you want to explore more, these are some additional resources. This is the GitHub repository that shows the outputs from the code, which pretty much provides outputs at provincial level, which can be used to expand this Zambian model to provide insights on a more granular level. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kumbuso. Great presentation, really insightful. I think the thing that really does stand out to me the most is the use of stakeholder engagement. I think is really important and often might be missed from these kinds of studies, particularly in the global south. It's very important to get people involved that aren't necessarily the ones doing the modeling. And I definitely think it will help to increase the understanding of people around these topics. So it sounded really, really good. And hopefully, I'm sure people will build upon this and take it further, I hope.
Yeah, that's what I hope as well.
Yes, definitely. So we have time for two questions. So I have so if you can use the Q&A function in the chat, that would be very useful. So we've got one question, Kumbuso, which is the soybeans to be used for biofuels assumed to come from additional agricultural output on top of what is consumed as food, or is it assumed to come from the BAU output scenario?
Okay, that's a good question. Let me go back to that. Okay.
Yep. Go ahead.
So in essence, what's happening is, if you look at the difference between the biofuel adoption potential and also the increased agriculture demand, this is looking at the potential in terms of dedicated soil for the purpose of biofuels. If you refer to the renewable energy strategy and action plan, these are the targets that are set by the Ministry of Energy. So this makes it easy while you're trying to model potential and also gauge these targets. Then you've got the increased agriculture demand scenario that projects even further now. This is what now we're using to see how much biofuel is possible by 2050 to offset imports.
Right.
Yeah, so in short, there are scenarios that are actually complementary in fashion. You find that one scenario is getting, targets from policy documents, Another scenario is also getting targets from another recent policy documents just to compare coherency and ensure that there is the actual synergy as opposed to conflict.
So great. Thank you very much. Any other questions? You have about 20 seconds to get your question into Kumbuso. And if you don't get it in quick enough, then we will move to Kamaria. I think I'm going to assume that we don't have any more questions for now, but okay. There was two questions that have just came in, so I'm going to ask the first one that came up.
Okay.
And that is, do the policy documents have coherence? I think by that they mean the original sort of towards the start of your presentation where you discuss the different. I think you're going the right way. Yeah, I think so. Yes, I think they are referring to this.
All right. I think the short answer to that is no. You find that the problem that has been there in the local space is a decent body of work has gone into research, but most of the outputs tend to be white elephants. And that's where I think the work that CCG and CLEWs Zambia are doing are key. They're trying to bridge the gaps, and the work that researchers like myself are doing. We try to leverage on the strengths of previous studies to ensure that we're working coherently and there are no silos. So in the recent past, the issues have been always silo work, and also you find that one document talks about something totally different, then a different document comes in from without. So that's been the issue. But currently, I think with the work that CCG is doing in Zambia, this is trying to be eliminated. And if you look at the green growth strategy, the integrated resource plan, I think these are good bodies of work that are trying to bridge that gap. And if you look at also the ongoing stakeholder engagement and workshop and capacity building frameworks, they are meant to actually bridge the gaps that have been identified previously.
Yeah, thank you very much, Kumbuso. I'm sure that's a good answer. Sorry to the question that there is one more question, but we don't have time for that at the moment. So I'll hand over to Kamaria. Thank you very much for your presentation, Kumbuso. And Kamaria,
You're welcome.
please feel free to have us. You can still have. I know we're going to run over time, but feel free to still present for 20 minutes if you need. So yeah, go ahead. Thank you again, Kumbuso.
Thanks. Yeah, I think I timed it around 15 minutes, so we'll see where we end up. Are you seeing everything okay?
Yeah, I can hear and see both. Thank you.
Awesome. Okay. So yeah, I'm Kamaria. I'm a PhD candidate at Simon Fraser University in Canada, in the Sustainable Energy Engineering program. I'm a part of the Delta E+ research group, where we focus on energy system modeling for sustainable development. And a bit of my research background, I've worked on mostly CLEWs, a few different CLEWs modeling projects. And then I've also done some other work on electric vehicle life cycle assessments and also modeling grid impacts of EVs. And so today I'm going to talk about a model that I developed, CLEWs Canada. And before I get into the model, I wanted to take a moment to acknowledge the land that I'm on and how that relates to my work. This is something we do a lot where I live, but I don't know how common it is everywhere else in the world. So the image here shows all of the different First Nations across what's now called Canada. And these were the original stewards of the land. And because my work considers land use, and especially how we can do a better job of taking care of it, I always want to keep in mind the practices and teachings of these groups. So I hope that we all get to keep learning about the impacts of colonialism in Canada and all around the world, and consider Indigenous teachings in our work. I've learned that they can be so important, so relevant, and something that we should all just, keep adding in there. So today I'm coming to you from the unceded and stolen territories of the Semiahmoo, Katsi, Coquitlam, Kwantlen, Kaikat, and Tsawwassen First Nations. Okay, and To provide a bit of background and lit review on CLEWs Canada, there were a few Canada or like sub-regional parts of Canada studies that involved some or all of the CLEWs Nexus. So all of the studies that I've listed here were important background for our work. And just to talk a little bit about what full Canada models for CLEWs did exist already. So we found a case study using an integrated assessment model with a focus on decarbonizing electricity generation and the associated water consumption. So that's the first one under the full Canada models. And the other one was a system dynamics simulation model showing more of those socioeconomic considerations so that it showed different impacts than the optimization style CLEWs framework that we were using. So none of these does what an osmosis CLEWs model does or answers the kind of questions we were interested in. So that's why we wanted to apply the CLEWs framework to Canada. And in particular, we chose to look at biofuels for electricity production in Canada. What does that look like? And how to examine how that energy system policy can impact water and land systems in unforeseen ways. And this slide shows the biofuels pathway we included in the model. And we wanted to look at the land and water impacts of having biofuels and BECCS, bioenergy and carbon capture and storage, available in the model. And so this crop will provide a low emissions energy source for our decarbonization scenarios, but then it will also be in competition with food crops for land and water resources. And so these interactions are what we were interested in for the Canada case study. So from that, I'll show results from 3 scenarios. The first has no biofuels pathway in the model, but it has an emissions cap that reduces each year and gets to 0 in 2050. So a net zero by 2050 scenario with no biofuels. And then the second scenario has that emissions limit as well. All of the scenarios do. So that's kind of our baseline. Second scenario has now the biofuels and BECCS. And then the last option still has the biofuels, still has the net zero emissions limit, but it also has a limit on the agricultural water use allowed. And I think generally I'll call these the first is the net zero scenario or baseline, scenario 2 is biofuels, and then scenario 3 is water limit. And then lastly, before getting into the results, I wanted to mention just a couple further points about the model, some assumptions and limitations in it. So this model is only looking at the electricity sector. So other energy end use sectors are not considered. As well, only the land and water impacts of biofuels are included. So of course, the other energy sources will also have impacts on the CLEWs Nexus, but we're kind of zeroing in on that biofuel interactions. As well, we've set it up that if more cropland is created, it's coming out of forest land area. And that's just, how we've set it up in the model. And then lastly, we also set a maximum capacity limit on hydro and nuclear. And that's, to be able to see the, to make sure that the biofuels does play a role, but also to kind of reflect what we see as reasonable real world a reflection in Canada for, like physical limitations, but also political limitations. Great. Okay, so now we can get into the model results. I'll start with the energy results, then land and water. So here you can see the electricity system. On the left is our baseline net zero. And this is a least cost optimization model. So it is in the baseline scenario with no switchgrass biofuels. The model is choosing the least cost outcome to reach net zero by 2050. So we see that it first uses the available capacity for nuclear and hydropower before the variable renewable sources are used to fill up the rest of the energy demand. And then for the net zero scenario with biofuels, the biofuels being in red, the switchgrass biofuels can meet the net zero electricity demand with a baseload energy supply at a lower system cost compared to the net zero scenario without biofuels. So now we do see those biofuels coming in. This sort of points to that having that low carbon baseload generation is pretty critical to decarbonizing the system while maintaining resiliency. There's a lot of benefits there. And this is a concern with electrification and decarbonization in general, and sort of highlights why we're interested in biofuels as an energy source, of course. But there will also then be those impacts on land and water. And in the last scenario here, the water limit scenario, you can see that the biofuels are almost entirely eliminated. And so that sort of hints to those impacts to come that we'll see in the next couple of slides. So now we have the land cover and crop area. So these results at the top are comparing the total land cover for the country by type, starting with from the top water, grassland and woodland, forest, built-up land, barren land, and agriculture. And as I mentioned before, as we need to dedicate more land to agriculture, that'll come out of forests, and there's a negative variable cost on the forest land. So there's an advantage. The model has an incentive to create as much forest land as possible and only switch over to the agriculture as it needs it. And so we can definitely see in the biofuel scenario a large increase in that area. And we can zero in on those impacts even more by looking at that the lower plots, the agricultural area broken down by crop. And the main thing just to see there, of course, is on the left, none of the switchgrass there, and then how much the total land area for crops increases when we add in those biofuels. And next, I'll go on to the agricultural water use. And again, kind of similar, but even more dramatic here, the increase in agricultural water use once we add in those biofuels. And so current agricultural water use is about 2.95 billion cubic meters without the biofuels, and no water limit for the model. And then this increases to 238.4 billion cubic meters with those biofuels. And then the water limit scenario is even lower than our baseline without biofuels. So this sort of points to me that for Canada specifically, the major limitation of biofuels would probably not actually be land use, but water use. So now sort of tying some things together, we can look at the crop yields to see some of the more of those impacts. And so taking the net zero as a baseline, we can see that once we add in the switchgrass biofuels in the middle scenario, it might be, some of them are a bit hard to see, but the yields for the other crops are all reduced a little bit. And then for wheat, it's reduced quite a bit. And so in the biofuel scenario, this is because the amount of land needed to produce the switchgrass for biofuels is now competing with the other crops, which all have set demands. And these other crops now need more land to grow because there's less of that most fertile land available, since there's just more cropland needed overall. And then this makes the yield go down, which would most likely lead to an increase in cost for that crop. And then in the water limit scenario, we also see the yields decrease for each crop. And so in this one, even though there, if you remember for the energy plots, very little biofuels being produced, there is quite a pronounced decrease in yields for all the crops now. So this is less from the competition for land and more directly because in this limit with the limit on water, the crops would end up needing to be more and more rain fed instead of irrigated. So that will have a large impact on crop yields and again, would strongly inhibit the uptake of biofuels in the model. So summarizing all of that a little bit, first, hydropower, nuclear, fossil fuels, they all have the benefit of providing dispatchable baseload energy, whereas other renewables such as wind and solar are variable, and the electricity needs to be used or stored. So switchgrass biofuels can contribute low carbon dispatchable electricity to Canada, but will have a high impact on land and water. So for the second takeaway, with the direct impact from increasing switchgrass production is a lot of land and water resources needed to produce that crop. There's also an additional amount of land that's needed for other crops, especially wheat, since the most fertile, highest yield land is used up faster, and crops are forced into more marginal cropland, and that's not previously chosen as optimal by the model. And number 3, water use is probably the most limiting factor for using biofuels for electricity generation. And then number 4, given that limited availability of water and also land for biofuels, it is likely that any biofuels should be used for to decarbonize those hard to decarbonize sectors prior to using them for electricity. It's not the most efficient use of it. And then lastly, I thought that while Canada does have quite a lot of land and water resources available, these impacts that we're seeing in this model are also very applicable and probably even more important to consider in some countries other than Canada, with less available land and water resources, especially per capita. Canada's a pretty big country with not as many people compared to a lot of other countries. And it's also especially important to consider these impacts, since climate change will increasingly destabilize crops, production, and water supply. So hopefully learning about CLEWs Canada was interesting for all of you. And if you would like to know more, in addition to any questions today, of course, there's also a paper published on the model where you can find all of the details. And since we completed this project a bit ago now, I also wanted to just share a few of the sort of updates, related projects that have been continued since. So first, since CLEWs Canada is based on all open source data and tools, we have been working to apply the same workflow, but as a general automated tool to create a base CLEWs model for any country, which we call CLEWs Global. And since CLEWs Canada is based on Osmosis Global electricity system data, having that same sort of structure as Osmosis Global, but a CLEWs Global would definitely be very useful for me and hopefully for everyone else too. And so shown here is the full workflow for CLEWs Global, which is just an updated version of the CLEWs Canada workflow. And you can see that Osmosis Global, which has all the electricity system data, and then the GAEZ is the Global Agroecological Zoning Database, provides the most of the land and water data. And these are both open and global data sets. So those sort of form like the base of all the data we need for CLEWs Global. And then there's also a configuration file that includes user inputs, such as the country or countries, model period, and any additional parameters that are need to be used to create that basic CLEWs model. And right now, all these pieces work. I use them for CLEWs Canada, and we're using them on other models too, but we're yet to finish sort of ironing out all the details and automating the whole thing. And we also want to continue to add to and refine the process based on those models that we've developed so far. And I'm just to go into a couple of details from that. So one of these pieces that maybe some people have already used is CLEWsy. And this was built by my supervisor, Dr. Taco Neat, and it's an available tool to help you build your CLEWs model much more easily. And while we were using it in the CLEWs global workflow with Osmosis Global and GAEZ data, you can also use it with your own data inputs, and it will build all the input activity ratios, output activity ratios, and create your parameter file based on from a YAML file input. So that's one tool that that's been improved and shared since CLEWs Canada. And then another one is GeoCLEWs. As I mentioned, we got our land and water data from GAEZ, Global Agroecological Zoning Database. And so this tool, GeoCLEWs, was developed by a colleague, Yelda Saidi. And so with that GAZ data, it is pretty cumbersome, very detailed. And so GeoCLEWs is our way of processing the data collected from GAZ and clustering it in order to simplify the outputs and make them the way we want them for our CLEWs model. And so this tool is available on the GitHub. And so, yeah, all those tools and data sources are available. They're great to use for any CLEWs model. And also, eventually, you will have access to CLEWs Global so that you can use all the tools even easier. And that's all from me. Thank you so much for having me today and for organizing. Happy to take any questions.
Great. Thank you, Kamaria. I have heard about this paper before, but it was a really good presentation. So thank you very much. And it's cool to hear about the future work around CLEWs Global and stuff. I'm sure there'll definitely be some people in this call or watching a recording which would be interested in using that, I'm sure. So yeah, thank you very much. So yeah, we have time for 2 questions specifically for Kamaria, and then I just have 2 questions to close off the meeting. So we do have one already, and it is, what crops for biofuels would most likely be used for hard to abate industries, and in which industry were you looking at?
That's a good question. We only included switchgrass as an option, and that was partially just because it's what seemed like it would be efficient for our model, and it had good conversion ratios, and it was recommended from a few sources. It's an interesting one for Canada because we don't have switchgrass already. So it actually, we did try others before. We did a model with maize as the biofuel source, but switchgrass was it more efficient just already, but also because Canada doesn't have switchgrass, it didn't have as much competition with crops already, and it was had a higher crop yield with different land than the other crops already there, at least for our model. I'm not a farmer or an expert in that, so I don't know if that would bear out in the end. But it would definitely be really interesting to do a study where you have more options, and especially if you're representing those sectors where it would be more useful. But I haven't done that yet, so I'm not actually sure of the final answer, but it's something that I'd be really interested in investigating more.
That's great. Thank you very much. We do have time for one more question. Oh, that was just a timer to say that was your time up. If anybody else has any other questions, then please feel free to ask them the question and answer now. I'll give 30 seconds if people want to ask one. I guess if one doesn't come through, it just means that your presentation was perfect, Kamaria. So
Great.
Okay, I think that considering the time, I think that there isn't any more questions. So I think I just wanted to close it up by asking a couple of questions myself. So maybe I can ask one of them to you, Kamaria, and then also one to Kumbuso if you are still there, and then we can close the session. So considering your camera is on at the moment, Kamaria, I think just one question that I think is important for policymakers to do is, I think, how would you promote or sell CLEWs to policymakers based on your experiences? So how would you sort of tell someone that's never used the CLEWs framework or modeled why it would be useful for them?
Yeah, I mean, I'm so deep in it that I couldn't imagine not thinking it was such a good idea to use it. I'm obviously definitely very very on the side of using it. For someone who maybe isn't sure and hasn't ever used it before, I mean, maybe I just show them my presentation, and I know for Canada in our policy, they talk about using biofuels, not necessarily for electricity the way I have it, but to show that if you are considering the energy system in isolation, then that can seem like a great idea, asking everything. But there are those unforeseen impacts and interactions that will just get more and more important as since all of our resource systems need to be protected with climate change. And even without using biofuels, where I live in British Columbia, I think our electricity is like 96% hydro. And so there's, huge implications with how our water systems will change there as well. And so I think just going through any impact in any situation, it's rare that there's a situation where it wouldn't have an impact. And I think showing that if you haven't considered it before, you'd probably just be shocked and say like, oh, I didn't realize I was, maybe pushing for this one policy thing, and I didn't consider all of the more like wholesome perspective of those impacts. And so I think that would convince anyone, but yeah.
No, that's really great. Yeah, thank you very much. And I certainly echo your points. The fact that how much of a holistic approach I think you can take can be very useful and sort of connect policymakers from different teams in particular. So yeah, thank you for your answer. And then Kumbuso, different question for you. Considering that kind of, I guess, what Kamaria showed at the end was like the creation of like new workflows to produce models and help with modeling. What more do you think can be done with CLEWs, in your opinion?
Well, I think in the, should I say, global South context, I think emphasis must be on ensuring that the model development is local-centric. Most of these tools in the global north do not, should I say, capture the attributes that are obtaining on the ground in the Zambian case and many other global south countries. And also, even as we try to showcase value, it's key to ensure that the human face is attached to it, where you explain the issues and ensure that there's that human aspect in terms of, okay, the reason why we're facing what we're facing is because of ABCD. I think this was evident in our stakeholder engagement, where we're able to have discussions with farmers, policymakers, experts in the field, laymen. So you can actually even appreciate people are wise. They know what affects them. So even as you communicate to them with that element of being inclusive, it's easier for you to get the right answers and ensure that, because if you've got a group of people who are actually impacted by issues being faced, especially in Zambia, it's very easy for us to come up with inclusive, should I say, policy and also implementation thereof. So I think transparency is key, ensuring that even as things are being developed, but I think so far I would say that is being done already. I just hope it can continue. If you look at the work that CCG is doing in Zambia, for instance, with SIG Zambia, they're doing that already to ensure that the locals are part of the solution. They coin their own solution, ensuring that we achieve the much needed sustainable development goals. So sustainability is actually what's key. Especially when funding runs out, you find that most of such great initiatives become white elephants. That's the reason why, if such can be embedded into education curriculum in terms of planning from the decision-making point of view, it becomes part of the process, as opposed to where it's an independent process. The moment funding runs out, you find that people will go back to the business as usual. Why should we suffer if we can go back the way things used to happen? So I think that would be my contribution when it comes to that.
Thank you very much. And actually, there is a follow-up question, which I think it would be good if you could just give a short answer to, is that Moses asked, what is the most effective approach to stakeholder engagement when the researcher is located outside of the country?
All right. So for me, for instance, the way I did it was when I was doing this, most of the time I wasn't in Zambia. So I had to work and collaborate with people on the ground who were pretty much doing the engagement in different parts of the country. So I think the catch is for the researcher doesn't need to worry about doing everything. The catch is just to work collaboratively. I think that's the most important part. If you're able to work collaboratively, even better, especially if you can ensure that even the person engaging people in a particular area is someone well known in the area, people will be open to actually respond and be honest in terms of what's impacting them and how best they think they can be helped. I think that has proved to be quite useful in that regard. And if I'm being honest, you find that modelers tend to be too technical and they tend not to get the right insights from stakeholders. So that's one other thing that easily helps.
Yeah, thank you very much. I do agree that sometimes, as a mod, I am a modeler myself, but not necessarily coming from a background of coding or modeling all of my like academic career. And I do agree that sometimes the technical approach doesn't always work because you need to get that basic understanding at the beginning before you go into the more technical aspect of it. So I think that's a really good point to echo and a good point to finish on, I think. So, yeah, thank you both for joining us today. It's really good to hear the great work that you've both been doing. And hopefully we're going to have more of these webinars specifically to do with CLEWs applications. So hopefully we can host some other people in the future to discuss their work, or maybe we'll have you two again when you release some more papers. But yeah, thank you very much for your help. And I'll speak to both of you soon. And thank you for everyone to joining. And I hope everyone has a good day.
Thanks so much, Kane.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
See you later.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.